Okay, well, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to the conference this morning to talk about the ancient tree inventory. The presentation this morning, I'm going to look at what the ancient tree inventory is, and I'll probably abbreviate that to the ATI. It's a bit of a mouthful, the ancient tree inventory. We're going to look at the life cycle of a tree, from its sapling through to its old age. We're going to look at what you can use the ATI for, and then we'll have a quick look at the end as to how you can record a tree and add records to this system. And hopefully we'll have enough time, maybe 5 minutes or so, for a question at the end. So what is the ancient tree inventory? Well, basically it's just a database of big old trees in the UK. It's run by the Woodland Trust, and it has support from the Tree Register, which you may know as TROBY, the Tree Register of the British Isles is its old name, and also support from the Ancient Tree Forum. It's been going for about 20 years or so. It started out originally called the Ancient Tree Hunt. So it's basically a citizen science project. You know, anyone can record a tree on the system, and we rely on the public to do that. And we'll look at how to do that at the end of this presentation. The trees are then verified by a team of trained Woodland Trust volunteers, of which I'm one, covering Scotland. And it's a dynamic system. So, you know, once you've added a record, that isn't the end of it. Those records are or can be updated. You can add new photographs. You can record changes in the girth of the tree. We'll record whether the tree's been lost or damaged and so on. And the website includes a very good interactive map, which we'll look at in a second. So currently, the database has over 175,000 verified records on it in the UK. So here's the map I was talking about. If you're familiar with the Scottish borders, this is Melrose up here and St Boswell's down here. And each of these map pins you can see is a tree that's been recorded by somebody. And they're color-coded by a classification. So the Woodland Trust classifies trees into ancient, veteran and notable. And we'll look at that classification in a moment. You can see on here the orange ones are ancient, so there's only one, and you'll probably also spot it's got a no entry sign on it. That's simply because it's on private land, it's in someone's garden. This is a very old sweet chestnut tree at Bemiside House. The green ones, the majority are veteran trees, and there's a few notable trees in purple as well. And on this map, if you were to click on one of those pins, you get a little box pop up like this one here with the species name at the top. This actually also has a name as well as the species, and some brief details about the tree. If you click again on that box, you get several pages of information, details of the tree, photographs and so on. The other thing to note about this map on the website is you've got different map bases. So this is the OS map, obviously. You've also got aerial photography, and you've also got historic maps. It's got the first edition OS maps available as well. So that's quite useful, looking at, you know, what the landscape used to look like, which in this part of the world is about 1860. You can obviously zoom and pan the map as usual. But the other good feature this has is a filter. So you can filter the trees you're seeing by all sorts of criteria. But in particular, you know, you may want to just filter by species or by the ancient category or by certain girths, depending on what you're looking for. So only trees that have been verified will appear on this map. So I thought we'd then look at the life cycle of a tree. So trees are amazing things. You know, some trees live a very, very long time. if they escape getting felled or blown down or diseased, they can live a long time. And I would suggest that trees are probably the largest and the longest lived organisms on the planet. They live on just a totally different time scale to humans, which is why I think they inspire awe in people. But all trees start as a small seedling, and over time they start to grow and they form a trunk and branches, and they're growing strongly upwards. And each year the tree is going to put on another ring of growth around its trunk and on its branches. So depending on the species, this might just take a few tens of years if it's a fast-growing species like poplar, or it may take hundreds of years if it's an oak or a yew. So as well as age, the size will obviously depend on the species and on the conditions it's growing in. So at this stage we have a fully mature tree. It's reached the limits of its growth. It's limited by a lack of nutrients and also by the height of the tree. There's only a certain height that the system within the tree can pump its water and nutrients up to. And it also, every year it needs nutrients and water to produce the extra growth. So it's reached the limit of its size here. So what does the tree do next? Well, it can't move, it can't go off and find food somewhere else. But to some extent it can recycle nutrients. So what tends to happen is trees at this stage start shedding branches. They die back from the top and from the sides. And this is something we call retrenchment. So people talk sometimes about trees growing downwards at this stage. They become shorter and stumpier, although that depends on the species. The other thing they do is they become hollow. So the old heartwood in the tree starts being attacked by fungi, by invertebrates. This doesn't really matter to the tree in the sense that it's still got plenty of strength in the outer ring of trunk. But as that decay happens in the middle of the tree, the nutrients fall down to the base of the tree and can get picked up again, or the tree can even grow roots into that hollow center to pick up nutrients. And the role of fungi and invertebrates is absolutely key in that. And how long they live, well, that just depends on the species, it depends on where they are, the soil, and at the end of the day it depends on luck. But eventually the tree will die, and it will leave a stump, and that stump itself may last hundreds of years, and it in itself is a great value for biodiversity. So what do we mean by these terms, ancient and veteran trees? Well, ancient trees are really the trees in the post-mature stage that are obviously old. They're past maturity and they're old compared to trees of the same species in that same location. And veteran trees are trees that are mature or post-mature. They have lots of the characteristics of ancient trees, but they don't have the great age. So those characteristics may have been caused by damage rather than age. So here are just some characteristics of ancient veteran trees. There'll be cavities and water pockets, where the tree has forked or where it's lost branches. They'll get hollowing in the dead ends of branches. As we've spoken about, it will nearly always have a large girth for the species. And a lot of species develop burrs on the trunk and buttresses at the base. The hollowing trunk may or may not be obvious. I would suggest all ancient trees are hollow, but whether you can see that depends on whether openings have developed at the base or sometimes higher up the stem where it's lost branches and so on. And as we talked about, this retrenchment is quite characteristic of ancient trees, where the top and the sides, the larger branches start to die back, and the tree really starts to grow new growth from lower down. So in terms of the ancient tree inventory, you might be asking, well, which trees do we go out and record? Because we obviously can't record all trees. If I look out the window here, down the borders, I can see hundreds of trees. But what we record and what we want to record are significant trees. And by that I mean big old trees, because these are the ones that are most important historically and the most important for biodiversity. We can record any tree. There's no limit on the maximum size or minimum size of girth. So if there are trees that have particular historical or cultural connections, we can record those as well. So I'm just going to look briefly at what the three categories comprise of: the ancients, the veterans, and the notables. So there's about 14,000, maybe a few more ancient trees on the inventory. And I always think of these as the wow trees, you know, the sort of tree that if you're walking along a path and you come across one of these, you can't just walk past it, you have to stop and look at it. It stops you in your tracks. They're big, old, characterful trees. Veteran trees, there's over 100,000 of these on the database. They're significant, big trees with scars, but they don't have the great age of the ancient trees. They'll be past their prime certainly, and probably hollowing. And that, you know, it's a subjective classification, and sometimes it's very difficult to decide which classification to put it in, but those are the broad guidelines. And then we have notable trees. There's around about 50,000 of these. They have to have some local significance. Perhaps it's, you know, it might be a tree that's been planted more recently as a replacement for a very famous ancient tree, or it might be, well, in an urban landscape where there are few trees, it might be just a big tree that's very significant in that landscape. And the verifiers are the person who decides whether the tree is of sufficient significance to be recorded or not. So a quick talk about age of trees. The most popular question that anyone asks me when I go and look at a tree is, how old is it? And the answer is almost certainly, I don't know. Some species live far longer than others, and there's a wee chart here of girth in meters for different tree species, and then indications to whether we might classify those as ancient or veteran. So you can see, you know, things like yew, famously long-lived, over 1,000 years. They have to get to significant girth, 5, 6, 7 meters before we can start thinking about them being ancient in terms of their lifespan. Whereas, you know, a lot of trees never get to that sort of girth at all. Field maples and rowans. Doesn't mean they're not as old, it just means they don't get as big. So where the tree grows has a huge effect on its size. If you think about oaks, in the south of England, you might find 12-meter girth oaks. You wouldn't find those in Scotland. You know, in Scotland, I think you'd be lucky to find many oaks much over 7 meters in girth, and that's a climatic thing. You know, they grow more slowly up here. So you can't easily determine the age of a tree from its girth. If you look on the internet or you look in books, you'll find all sorts of formulae and charts that estimate the age from the girth. And that may well be, you know, as a broad brush estimate, that's fine, but it is, in reality, it's highly variable based on the environment the tree is growing in and also the history of the tree, how it's been managed and what effects it's been subject to over its time. So the only way really to find out the age of a tree is from historical records. So in the borders, many estates here have records of their landscaping over the centuries, and that's often a good clue to when the planting was carried out, and it gives you a far better idea of the age of the trees. So unless you start coring trees and counting rings, which I've never done, I think that's really the only way to try and estimate the age of a tree. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, on the website, under how we record up here, there's a guide to species, and for I think it's about 12 most common trees, it gives you an idea of girth and size and whether they're ancient or veteran. So let's look at a few ancient trees. So the tree on the left here is a sycamore, south of Peebles at a farm called Posso, which has some very big old sycamores. And this shows retrenchment. So the crown of this tree was almost certainly much, much bigger a long time ago and has died back. There's a small amount of it still remaining, and the tree has started to grow lower down. So the tree over time will become much more squat. On the right is an older tree near Traquair in the borders. You can see this is, you know, seriously hollow. Its main stem has died back some time ago and it's resprouted from around here, and some of these branches have then hollowed and died back and it's sprouted again. You'll also notice there's a lot of, you can see there's been a lot of grazing around this tree. The good news is that these trees have now been fenced off, so the sheep can no longer get at them, and the trees are now sprouting new shoots right from the base of these trees. So it really raises the question as to how old a tree is, because the top growth of that tree could die right back and it will resprout from the base again and keep growing. The new growth may be tens or hundreds of years old, but the actual tree itself, the roots underground and the stump could be far, far older than that. And could they actually be immortal? Could they just keep growing forever? And we think of ancient trees as, you know, great big old oaks and yews and things, but we shouldn't forget the smaller species as well. Trees like rowans and hazels can be quite old, especially if they've been managed, you know, as pollards or as hedges and continuously cut. The actual stems themselves can get quite old. Here are a few more pictures. This is the oaks at Dalkeith, which probably many of you will know, on Dalkeith Country Park. There's some very old oaks there, many hundreds of years old. You can see it's quite a short, stumpy tree with a huge bole at the base and hollowing. There's some more older here on the top right, where the main stem is either died back or it's been coppiced and new growth has come from around the edge of it. And there's a big old round tree down here as well. So what's the value of ancient trees? Well, I would suggest there are several values to it. Obviously biodiversity. They're massive reservoirs of life. They support lots of different invertebrates, birds, bats, all sorts of stuff. And many species of invertebrates rely on decaying wood, beetles, longhorn beetles, hoverflies, and so on. But there's also the historical and cultural connection. it's a link to our past because the trees are so much older than we are. So the picture here, some of you will recognise as the capon tree just south of Jedburgh, right next to the A68. A very old tree, a remnant of the Jed forest, and reputed to be a hanging tree. And that still has a cultural significance in that the ride-outs from Jedburgh go out there to the tree every July. And people estimate it's somewhere between 500 or 1,000 years old, that tree. And the final value I would suggest is just aesthetic. You know, they're amazing things to go and look at and admire. They're beautiful. And I think some countries in Europe admire them for that more than perhaps we do. So why was the ancient tree inventory created 20 years ago? Well, it's really to raise awareness of old trees amongst the public and also amongst the landowners, and hopefully that will encourage people to protect them. It also helps us record threats to the trees and understand the losses and the risks to these old trees. Some people would say these are as important as old buildings that have protection, but ancient trees themselves do not have, I was going to say any protection, hardly any protection. So how can you make use of the ancient tree inventory? Well, obviously you can use it to find beautiful old trees to visit, either locally or, you know, when you're on holiday, you can go and look at that map and find out what ancient trees are round about. You can also use it to highlight areas of old woodland, you know, where there's concentrations of particular trees, maybe of a certain species you're looking for. They're used for research. Several PhD students have used the database for their research. And I was just reading the Butterfly Conservation Scottish Borders newsletter last week and noticed that a couple of people, I think their name was Jeff and Gail Ballinger, were looking for purple hair streaks, and they used the ATI to locate big old oak trees and found the trees at hair stains in the borders, and they found the purple hair streaks on them. So if you're looking for a particular species, if it's galls, and you want to know where particular species of tree are that those galls live on, this is maybe one way to find them. And it's also, it helps people get out into the countryside. People, use it to go and find trees to photograph and so on. And of course, you can use it to record new trees. So we're going to have a quick look at how to record a tree on the website. There are still a lot of trees out there to be recorded. One piece of PhD research recently came up with the figure that we've only recorded, they think, about 10% of all the ancient trees in the UK. So there's plenty more out there to go and find. Anyone can register and get recording on the website. It's a citizen science project, or you can simply go in and update existing trees, add new photographs and so on. And we've got, as I said, a team of verifiers that will go through those records. On the website, up here under how we record, there's a recording guide. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but that's where all the information is if you need it about how to record the tree. This is where you need to go to, ati.woodlandtrust.org.uk, and top right, you can register, which is very straightforward. I think it just needs your name and email from memory, and then you sign in. And if you want to add a new tree, you go to the Add a Tree menu, or if you want to go and look at that map that we saw earlier, you go to Tree Search. And the information you need to record a new tree, the minimum information is quite simple. you need where it is, you need a 10-figure grid reference, and most people these days are getting that from their phones. There's several apps available that will sit on your smartphone and give you a grid reference. You need to record the species of tree. You need to record its girth at 1.5 meters above the ground, which sounds straightforward, but isn't always as easy as it might appear, and we'll have a quick look at that. Some information about whether it's about the access to the tree, which in Scotland tends to be quite straightforward because of the open access. It's only really if it's in a private garden would you need to make it as a private access designation, and some photos. You can also record additional information about the tree form, whether it's a maiden or a pollard or a multi-stem, things like that. The tree condition, whether it's hollowing, dead wood, so on. Any epiphytes like ferns or lichens, details of fungi, invertebrates, and so on. If you just record just the essential information, that's absolutely fine. The verifier can fill in more details, or other people can fill in more details later. So a quick run through measuring the girth, because it's quite important they're measured consistently across the country. So we measure it 1.5 meters above the ground. If you've got a straight tree like that, no problem at all. However, trees are not like that normally. They have things in the way. So if you've got a branch, a huge low branch, you can't record at that height. So you drop down to the narrowest point below 1.5 meters and measure it there. Okay, same problem here. You've got all sorts of birds on the tree. You can't measure it 1.5 meters, so you drop down to the narrowest point below that. And in some cases, you know, like a coppice stool, you may end up measuring almost at the ground. And what happens if it's not on a bit of level ground? Well, if it's on sloping ground, you measure it at the high point. So on the high side, you go up 1.5 meters. And if it's a leaning tree, you measure it on the lower side. And when you've done all that, you'll end up with a record something like this that says pending verification. And at some point, the verifier will go and almost certainly visit the tree, or possibly if you've got enough information and photographs recorded, they might do it online. So just to mention at the top right of the website here, that would be your name, your login name. There's something called My Trees, which will be all the trees you've recorded. And there's also something called My Messages. So there is a messaging system between the verifier and the recorder in the ATI. So that's not email, that's an internal system. So you would need to keep your eye on that in case the verifier messages you wanting more information. For instance, if they can't find the tree. So I hope that's inspired you to go out and look for some old trees, maybe carry a tape measure with you in your rucksack when you're out in the countryside. Thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions if we've got time, Rob.